welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today is Lisa Dougherty, Content Director at Range. Thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, hi Chase. Thanks for having me. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Yeah, it's great to talk to you. This is a topic that, well, you brought up a little while ago on LinkedIn. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about fashion and gaming and this blending of, I don't know, just a lot of different worlds coming together. And you gave a presentation on this a few years ago. And so I appreciate you being willing to jump on and have a conversation. I know you're passionate about this topic, but I don't know. When we were talking earlier, I've just been noticing, and I know you've been noticing the same thing, this blending of gaming, and fashion and product that we know in the real world crossing over into virtual spaces. And I thought, I don't know, people listening to this might think, well, isn't this a product design podcast? Like, isn't this for outdoor product design students? I think there's a lot of application here. And I really wanted our students and others who listen to recognize kind of where we're going, right? And there's a lot of interesting things happening right now. But I wanted to have you on to kind of clarify and enlighten us on how we got to this point and maybe where we're going. So with that said, how did you get into the outdoor industry? How did you get into this space where you're blending design and the outdoors? It seems like the perfect combination.
So my career path is anything but linear. So I've been in the world of advertising and content for about a decade now. And I kickstarted my career working at a third-party agency for advertising and production studios. So I handled a lot of like licensing and agreements and contracts and stuff for really big commercials for like Apple and Google and stuff like that. And I did that for a few years, and then I decided to take some time off. And I took the train around the country, and I started writing for outdoor blogs like She Explores. We used to be Dirtbag Darling, Stay Wild magazine. So during that trip is where I started to work on my writing skills specifically for the outdoors. Like I've always had a passion for nature. But it was really during that trip where I, started to get acquainted with the skill of writing about, being outside, what that does for me, its impact on my life and the world around me and stuff like that. And then when I got back from my train trip, I was looking to make like a career shift. I was working in advertising for a really long time, had a really great time during I like to call them my Don Draper days of working in big advertising. But I wanted to make a career shift and work in an industry that I knew was very passionate and impactful. And then I found Range, which was like a really, interesting and creative agency in the outdoor space. It was unlike any other thing that I had seen in the industry. It was very unconventional, which is what drew me to it. And I've, been working with Janine over at Range for about 5 years now, and I'm the content director there. And I get to work on, some really creative projects that are, rooted in a lot of research, consumer insights, and actionable data and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I got started in like the outdoor industry.
That's great. Well, and I like, outdoor, we use that in quotes because I feel like outdoor is so broad. Because it, skate is a part of outdoor, but maybe not traditionally seen as outdoor. And it's kind of hard to put all of these activities under one umbrella. But I think Range does that really well, right? Pulling in all these different activities and disciplines and in a really special and unique way. And if anyone wants to learn more about Range in particular, I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit of what you do with them today. But we did an interview with Janine as well, where we dive into the day-to-day of Range and what they're working on. So I'll link to that as well. But I guess just when did you start to recognize, I don't know, it seems like you have this ad agency experience where you're involved in entertainment, like you're involved in product, like you're seeing different aspects of I don't know, just of the agency side of things. When did you start to recognize gaming, which isn't like something you traditionally think about when you think outdoors? When did you start to see gaming and recognize that as kind of this creative force that eventually we're starting to see blend with with the outdoor community? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of an odd
Yeah.
question, but
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I feel like I recognized it like way before like the outdoor industry. Like I majored in advertising and mass communications, and that's kind of where my interests, um, that's kind of where like I cultivated an interest in like advertising and like like messaging for the masses. So like I did like a thesis paper on Marshall McLuhan, who is a communications theorist, who like coined the phrase like the medium is the message, and it's rooted in the idea that um, the medium in which you consume content will dictate how that content is perceived. So I've always been interested in the way people consume content. So you used to have like the written word with like books and newspapers, and then we evolved to radio, where it was more of like an audio communication, and that was like its own experience. And then we had computers, and then we had cell phones. So I've always been kind of interested in the evolution of tech as a medium to deliver content. And then I also like to think about like how we consume that content and like what that experience looks like. um but in terms of gaming and the evolution of that, and like where I saw, or where I started to recognize the intersection of that, was really like back in 2019, when I was at Outdoor Retailer, and I had the privilege of hosting some panel discussions and presentations, at the ranger station. And I always try to tackle like issues of social media and the digital landscape and stuff like that. And for that particular research project, like we started to, the idea of like fashion and like gaming was like starting to like bubble up, and it was kind of interesting. And like gaming, like we started to see like Pokemon Go. So gaming wasn't necessarily only happening like on the couch. Like when we saw like Pokemon Go come out, it was different in the sense that it was encouraging people to get off the couch and get outside. So that kind of piqued my interest, because it was inviting the audiences to participate in gaming, but also like participate in the real world. And I really enjoyed like the intersection of that particular game. So that's where I think I started to recognize it in terms of like like gaming and its relationship to the outdoors. And then as we've seen it played out like the past like 2 years, it's really built up. And then 2020 hit, and then like we've had like this really big like instance where like gaming is having a really big moment right now.
right. I think that's really helpful to talk about like these big gaming moments that are happening now, and talking about like why this is such a significant, I mean, it's becoming like a really significant part, or an aspect of more and more people's lives every day. It's not just like a niche activity, right? It's like generally accepted that people play, right? And play is something
Mm-hmm.
that just as people we need that, right?
Yeah.
And we need that social aspect. And it seems like, especially in the last few years, and then during the pandemic, right, like social games I have taken off even more than before, right? Just as everyone's home but wants to be together.
Mm-hmm.
And seems like the pandemic didn't cause this, but it probably accelerated, right? That need for people to come together, and virtual spaces is a place where that can happen, right? Whether it's Fortnite or whatever, or Animal Crossing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in some of these big changes that are happening, and like one in particular, you mentioned, just just gaming being just another form of content that people can engage in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea of medium is the message. And I don't know if this directly applies to what we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily apply to the outdoor, but maybe to the larger entertainment landscape. I know,
Mm-hmm.
was it Sony that announced, so they have Uncharted, this big series that they're going to do, this movie series that they also announced, well, as a part of, it's inspired by a video game called Uncharted, but there's a series of movies that they're going to come out with. There's a TV
Mm-hmm.
show that directly ties into it, and then they want their games to be extensions of those stories that happen on the big screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the TV shows. And so more and more I'm seeing like this seamless transition between, like, it's all just entertainment, right? And I know you're really
Mm-hmm.
interested in that as well, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
uh, we're not putting like movies necessarily in a box and TV in a box and games in a box. They're kind of all flowing into each other, right? Which I think is really interesting. And I don't know what the outcome of that is for this discussion around like the outdoors and fashion, but I guess the point of that is like all of this is blending together and becoming just a bigger part of people's lives. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that before maybe we dive into more of the specifics of, you know, fashion appearing in games. But what do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it feels, or it seems like very abstract to kind of like, you know, try to connect all those dots, but they're definitely there. But you know, kind of going back to like that idea that the medium is the message. Entertainment has always been a part of the human experience,
Mm.
right? So that's, you know, that's always been a part of our experience, and it's evolved over time, right? And it's evolved with the tools and the technology that we're using. Um, you know, so that's always kind of been like a part of like our history, the human history. And gaming just taps into like that human need to be entertained, or to pass the time, or escape, or you know, create an alternate like reality. You know what I mean? So gaming kind of taps into like different aspects of the human nature of like just really living. You know what I mean? And I think that has to do with um yes, being entertained, escaping when we need to, creating worlds that we want to be a part of. And, you know, like the evolution of like, of gaming in terms of like the different types of games that we've seen over time, like gaming is like really rooted in like exploration. So like one of the first like video games that was ever created was called Adventureland. And you know, it was like the first like text adventure game of its time, and it's actually the first example of a in-game advertisement, you know. So like it's, again, these the connecting of the dots seems like really abstract, but it's there. So like Adventureland was like, you know, rooted in like exploring, finding things, finding treasure and stuff like that. So like it, you know, it's tapping into like that human need to like explore, and like, you know, it might have been in a virtual world, but you know, and very text, you know, very text heavy, like, you know, kind of nostalgic analog kind of experience, you know, but it was like inviting people to like explore and dream and like just really tap into like their creative selves. But that example is interesting because it was also like an example of like the first like in-game advertisement. And then as like gaming and product placement and brand marketing kind of evolved together, which they do because gaming just became another platform for advertisers to connect with consumers. You know what I mean? And it evolved and took many forms throughout history. So, you know, like after Adventureland, you know, we saw like EA Sports was born, like imitating real life sports networks, and then virtual reality like FIFA, you know, came into play. And then, you know, as history goes on, or like, you know, as you move forward throughout the years, it's just like it continues to evolve, but marketing is always right alongside it, right? So like as gaming has evolved from one, you know, like console or like one you know, like story to another, like brand marketing and advertising has always been a part of that experience. You know, so like with Adventureland, it was like promoting the next version of the game. For FIFA, it was like in stadium ads, like on, you know, like on the banners, like on the field, you know, like Tony Hawk Pro Skater, you know, was very branded. And that was a part of the skating culture and like the skating experience, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I've always been interested in that, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, as the tools and the technology has evolved, product placement and marketing has always been right there alongside it, evolving with it. You know what I mean?
Right. Because it seems like, I mean, marketing is all about reaching people where they are at, right? Where,
Right.
whatever that medium is, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
film, whether it's TV, whether it's games, whatever social platform that it might be, it's all about reaching the eyeballs, wherever the
Mm-hmm.
eyeballs are.
Totally.
And so I'm impressed by these people in like 1991, even like with EA, people were thinking that way.
Hmm.
And thinking like there's an opportunity to put our brand in front of people's eyes. I'd be
Hmm.
curious what those discussions were like, right? Between EA executives and these potential partner brands. Do you happen to know any of the brands that were featured?
Like in 1991.
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel like in the 90s, from like 1991 to like 1999 is so like the consoles themselves started to evolve too. So
Yeah.
like we started to see like Sega, we started to see like PlayStation and like Xbox. So like when the consoles themselves, again, the medium began to evolve, like the game started to evolve too. So we went from like this really like kind of like glitchy kind of looking experience to like like virtual reality, and then we started getting into like simulation games like The Sims and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So in the 90s is where I think a lot of like sports brands, and a lot of like like fast food, like Subway and even like Coca-Cola, like those were like the really big players that like invested in gaming.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And like in terms of like advertising, it was like, typically like the top tier brands like Coca-Cola or Subway or, any of those brands were the first ones to really, you know, go into like the gaming territory. But I brought up Tony Hawk earlier, and I want to bring it up again because as gaming and advertising was evolving, Tony Hawk was like an interesting case study because the product integration in terms of like product placement, it wasn't just like on a banner or like a billboard or something in the background. It actually like enhanced the gaming experience.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that, it was very reflective of like skate culture at that time. So like skateboarders, had all these like really big sponsors. So like the independent trucks and like the Element like
Hmm.
skate decks and stuff like that. That was all in the game. So like we started to see like gaming acting as a mirror of like real life. You know
Right.
what I mean? So it
Yeah.
was like we started to see like the evolution of gaming like mimic the real world in a way that was relatable, and an opportunity for like the product integration to be a little bit more um organic. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I think that's where I'm especially interested is those first instances where like a product company, like one of these sports or outdoor fashion brands, had their product in a game, right? Because I know 1993, you shared with me an image of FIFA. Pretty hard for any of those players like to have a recognizable brand. There's some limitations on the game, right? Limited number of
Yeah.
pixels, like detail. Probably can't like brand those little pixelated people very well. But you have big brands, big hits like Panasonic, like you said, like the big
Hmm.
companies could be represented in that way. But as you get to like Tony Hawk, there's a little more detail. There's a little more like I don't know. There's an opportunity for product companies to be directly involved, right? And is that do you happen to know if that's like the first instance? It's probably hard to say. It's probably one of the first instances where you have product companies
Hmm.
that you're actually like your character is actually involved in using the real products that you could go and buy yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I was hinting at earlier, is that like the way in which like ads were showing up in games like has like evolved. So like
Right.
once we got The Sims,
Hmm.
where the user had the capability of interacting with products
Right.
to enhance the experience versus it just being in the background.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
like that was like, in my opinion, like that was like a big shift in terms of like how products showed up in games and how consumers and audiences like interacted with it. They actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it enhanced the experience, and they had a relationship with these products already. um so like that was a big moment, I think, like in the 90s when interacting with product was like enhancing the experience versus just like a flashing ad in the background to like
Right.
buy a Subway sandwich.
Yeah. Customizing your character really was that you know factor that allowed you to then be able to choose your product, right? And
Mm-hmm.
open up the
Yeah.
doors for brands to want their product in the games. Do you know anything about those conversations with brands, like how any of those went down? I'm assuming a lot of that isn't super well documented, right? Like those relationships between like a Tony Hawk, like, or the, I guess, whoever made the game, I don't remember, Sony or whoever the game studio was, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what those initial conversations would have been like. Is that driven by the game, or is it the advertisers, the product companies approaching them saying, hey, we'd really like our product in your game? Like, I'm really curious how, the
Yeah.
direction that flowed, but we,
Yeah.
we
No,
might not know.
yeah, I wasn't there, but I can only assume that it was advertisers like knocking on, EA Sports like door, like, hey, like we want to get in on this, and that stems from what you said earlier, like tapping into like audiences, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there's an opportunity to connect with audiences in a really unique way. And then, again, as gaming has evolved and the technology has evolved, it's become more of an experience, you know what
right.
I mean?
We kind of jumped over like EA. I know that we talked about some of the background product. There's not a lot of customization of your character. Do you happen to know if there were like any of the big sports companies like a Nike, Adidas, like any of these major players, were they participating in that? I'm curious about that as well. I know, the Coca-Colas, those big companies were involved in the ad on the advertising side, but I have to imagine some of the big sports product companies were in on that in the early days of something like EA. Those are so intertwined. I'd be curious if
Yeah.
they were involved on the gaming side.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you asked that question because I did do like a little bit of digging in terms of like the players themselves. So like when EA Sports like first came out, it wanted to replicate the experience of like being in an arena,
Hmm.
right? But what I thought was interesting is when it first came out, they had the names of the teams, but they wouldn't like specifically name out the players, right? So
Mm,
like you didn't. So I shared an image with you earlier, but like it's not a close up of like the apparel itself, right? So you
right.
can't see if it's like a team that's like sponsored by Xbox or Nike or anything like that. But as gaming and technology and the pixels get a little bit bigger, you start to see that, right? So when it first started, there wasn't necessarily an emphasis on, and I think that a lot of that has to do with licensing,
Yeah.
right? So like I have a lot of experience in that too, and I think with gaming, you know you learn as you kind of go with any kind of or any new platform, like there's licensing in terms of like likeness of the players and like like the Nikes and the Adidas like want to get permissions before they put their name on a player. Do they actually sponsor that player or do they not? So eventually that came to be, but it wasn't always a part of the gaming experience. And I think again that a lot of that has to do with like licensing and um the rules of advertising that
Right.
may have been like restrictive in the past are maybe not as restrictive now,
Right. Right. Well, and then, like you said, definitely the limitations on the technology, right? Like there's with
hmm
only so many pixels to work with, if you can't see that Nike swoosh clearly, that, there's no, that, it doesn't really make sense. So, I
hmm
imagine with the technology improving that there's more opportunity for product placement. But
hmm
you talked about the Sims being really significant too. Like that kind of ushers into the 2000s. And any specific brands that really jump out in that time? Again, that this time of customization, like the opportunity to customize your character being really significant.
Yeah, no, I mean, The Sims was a big idea or a big deal, again, because it gave the audience members and the consumers the option to be creative. And I'll probably talk about this like a little bit when we start to talk about like the present time. But it enabled them to like be creative and like either recreate the world that they're living in, but like with a different twist to it, or just recreate like an entirely different world. Some of the brands that I know that were like early adopters to like a collaboration with like a gaming like with any video games was Gucci. you know?
Mm.
So like Gucci comes up like a lot actually. Again, like kind of like an early adopter to entering like the virtual world. But they recently had a collaborate, or like they were in The Sims, and like Jane Fonda actually like shows their like latest collection, which I thought was like really interesting. But to answer your question, like Gucci comes to my mind like when I think of like The Sims.
Hmm. In the 2000s, they were on it that early.
No, this is like a most recent
Oh,
one.
oh, okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. But 2000s era Sims really just ushers in that idea that, oh, I could have a virtual space, right? Like
Hmm.
I can have a place that I customize, which now is like all too common, right? Like that's really interesting. In the 2000s, 20 years later, right? That's commonplace, right? Having your own space like that, that you have control over. Where does the iPhone fit into this, and like helping usher in gaming to the masses, and really making gaming, I don't know if there's like a stigma against it up until like the iPhone comes out and it's like everyone has games on their phone at all times. Is
Hmm.
there something to that kind of making gaming more acceptable?
Yeah, I don't know if acceptable is the right
Yeah,
word, but accessible is
yeah,
definitely what happened. Like with like when the iPhone came out, and I think people tend to forget how young like the first iPhone is. Like it's only like 14, yeah, like 14 years old. So
yeah,
like it's interesting because I think people forget like how quickly like technology has evolved. You know what I mean? So when the iPhone came out, like it really opened up the world in terms of like information and connection and stuff like that. And in terms of like gaming, um being able to connect with other people, you know I think there was like more of like there was like a spike in like competitive kind of games, like the Angry Birds or like something like that. But I think it just kind of opened up the world in a lot of different ways. And with gaming, it just enabled people to connect on like a global level. And also you could game wherever you wanted to, right?
mm,
So again, the medium is the message, and gaming, you didn't have to just do it at home. Now you can do it while you're sitting on the bus going to work, or you can sit it while you're waiting in an office somewhere. So it made gaming accessible, and people wanted to play. Like people
right,
could play anywhere. And that's what they started to do.
right. I am curious about, like, maybe this is a good time to reflect back on like why this matters. Like, why are we having this conversation about um, real product in virtual spaces and brands in virtual spaces? Like, what, I guess, to start, like, well, before we kind of jump in and talk about some more of the current events, current collaborations, like, why do you think this is important for product designers to pay attention to, and recognize that, maybe the history of this, like this history of brands in games. We talked extensively about like how big the entertainment industry is, and gaming is a part of that. But why do you think it's important for a product designer, or people in the outdoor industry to recognize those connections and that trend?
Yeah, I mean, people are gaming, and they're gaming a lot, and that's what we saw in 2020, right?
Hmm.
So like when the pandemic hit, like the world seemingly stopped moving, but virtually like we are still living. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And in terms of like product design and product placement and stuff, like we saw like a lot of crazy amazing things happen in 2020, just despite the pandemic. Like in the virtual world, there's just so much that happened in terms of like connection, community, and commerce and collaboration. And it's what we saw in 2020, and like the residual like habits from 2020 like are not going anywhere. um so like there's a bunch of data out there. Actually, we did a really intensive or extensive report about this for the Horizon report at Range, where there's a bunch of data points as to like how much gaming raked in 2020. I have a data point here, like digital games alone garnered like $126.6 billion over the course of 2020. I have another statistic that over like half of Americans like turned to gaming in 2020. So I mean, I think we need to recognize that we have the physical world that we're living in, but we also have this virtual world that we are very much a part of. It's growing. It's going to continue to grow. And the virtual world is inspiring what's happening in the real world. You know what I mean? So like we've created these virtual worlds, these virtual lives, virtual clothing, you know, like people have avatars who live their own separate lives in this virtual world, and consumers are interacting with them. Right. They're being creative. They're paying for it. They're actually paying to like, you know, outfit their digital avatars in like the latest like North Face kit. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, you know, I think to answer your question, I think it's important to pay attention because the virtual world has been around for a while. It's not going anywhere. People are gaming. They're not going to stop gaming. And they're investing in it.
It seems like sport and fashion are the first movers when it comes to, you know, and other major advertisers, right? You know, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, these companies that are just known for advertising. Right. Where do you feel like outdoor stacks up? I kind of feel like from my perspective, it seems like the outdoor industry has been behind on injecting their product into these spaces. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more, and maybe this is a good time to jump into it, but it seems like it's games like Animal Crossing where it's the users or the players themselves are the ones who see, oh, I can't get my favorite North Face jacket in the game, I'm going to make it, right? Mm-hmm. Which would have been a huge opportunity for some of these brands to be the ones that did that. But it was the people who did that, which is a common thread, and we're going to continue to see, you know, user-generated content in games in addition to in other social platforms. But where do you think the outdoor industry has stacked up when it comes to, you know, incorporating their products into games?
Yeah, you know, this is very much just like my opinion, but I think that the outdoor industry has been slow to, you know, like adapt to that. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think outdoor industry in general has an interesting relationship with technology and, you know, like the intersection of like technology and nature, like what does that mean for like the outdoors, and like what does that mean for like the individual and like the industry as a whole. I think we're really comfortable with talking about technology if it's Gore-Tex or if it's like with the jacket, but I think that there's a hesitation or, you know, a tendency to not really accept technology in outdoor spaces, you know, for whatever reason that might be, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about that. But I also think, you know, not just the outdoor industry, but other industries as well, I think we're hesitant to get into gaming at all because you couldn't measure like ROIs, you know what I mean? So like right now, as the technology has evolved, like so has the back end data of that. So, you know, now there's so much data available and real-time feedback that people are providing in these games like Animal Crossing, you know, that now is a really good time to start looking into the gaming platform because consumers want it. And that's what we saw with Animal Crossing. We saw, you know, audiences, like they took the initiative and they created a world, their own virtual world that they wanted to be a part of. And yeah, you know, like we saw like the hype beasts, people come up and start outfitting their like little Animal Crossing characters and Supreme and the North Face. And, you know, we saw creators like creating lookbooks and like having photo shoots, and like all of a sudden like Animal Crossing became like their runway for like fashion brands. And that included outdoor brands as well. You know what I mean? So,
I mean, Wendy's, oh, I was going to say, even Wendy's had their own island, right? Like on the fast food side of things. Right. And like, I don't know. It's other industries definitely seem to have like caught on to that more quickly than outdoor. And if outdoor has been pulled into it, it is through like Gucci, right? Who's maybe thinking that much further, right? And pulls the North Face along into Pokemon Go, which was a recent
Yeah.
development, right? That kind of seems like the direction, right? It's always some of these other industries that are looking a little further, but
Yeah. I want to just like give the individual some credit as
yeah,
well. Like this is something that I think a lot about, and is also like a little bit like abstract, but like the idea of like influencers and stuff like that, like really taking control, like taking the creative control back from advertisers. Like we're seeing like a shift right now, which we all know is going, like influencer marketing is like such a huge thing.
yeah,
And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because like individuals, like creative individuals, like really took the initiative and and has created a space where like they have more influence than the Coca-Colas and the bigger brands and stuff like that. And I think like during 2020, when all of these creatives either lost work or were stuck at home, really took the initiative to like keep working, being creative and collaborating. And, fortunately for brands like the North Face and Supreme and all these other brands, like they got to capitalize on that because consumers wanted to engage with the products that they care and they care about and they love. And consumers, like outerwear in general is like having a moment. It's been having a moment. So like the outdoor industry is being called in to get involved by consumers.
right. Where do you think? And we can keep talking about the current state, but I was thinking of the future of some of this along the lines of what you're talking about. Where do you see some of the future of this? Because you and I talked the other day about some of the missed opportunities, right? Like there's huge value in these brands participating and seeing their product in these spaces, and even if people aren't buying them, if people are making
Mhm.
Supreme product in Animal Crossing and using it and walking around, like
But
you're just
they are paying for it, like
right,
people are paying to like outfit their avatars, which again, like seems so abstract, but it's
right,
like it's here.
right. I guess the next step of that, right, is like you can buy those products in those virtual spaces. I wonder if there's some limitations on the technology, and we talked about this the other day, but like when is that next step coming where, okay, I can buy that virtual product for my avatar, but seamlessly I can also buy the physical product right in the game, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we talked about Instagram, like integrating shopping right into Instagram. And so I have to imagine that's not too far away, right? This opportunity to not only buy the virtual product, but in one click I can buy the physical product and get it to ship right away. I don't know. Do you see that coming? Are there any instances of
Yeah.
that happening now?
Yeah, so you're touching on like social commerce, right?
Yeah.
So like being able to shop on like social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. I think we're getting there. We're getting there quickly. Like each social platform is like kind of at their own phase in the process, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in terms of like, social commerce and like what that looks um like Snapchat in 2020 like released like an AR capability where you can try on your shoes and stuff.
Mm,
So I mean the need and the want is there. Like we're already seeing consumers like express that they want to be able to try things on virtually. Like, so I think each social platform is at its own particular place in terms of like social commerce and like what that actually looks like. So with Instagram and Facebook, it's like it links you to like a third party site to go actually hit buy,
yeah.
right. But technology moves so fast. It moves very quickly. And I have no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to make purchases in the gaming world very soon, if it's not happening already. Like I don't have any case studies at the top of my mind right now, but we're very well on our way to
Right.
getting there.
Well,
So,
I
you know,
know we've talked about the other day as well, like products like, is it Mirror that Lululemon bought, right? It's this
hmm
mirror product that you exercise in front of, but also you can buy
oh,
Lulu
I love
product through
that.
it, right? Like
Yeah.
that kind of seems like the precursor to that, right? Like you're not
Mhm.
gaming, but in a way it's social fitness, right? Through this product, but then they push out product through Mirror. I imagine that same thing could be coming from like Peloton, right? Like I'm surprised
Mhm.
Peloton hasn't done that already, like selling their own product, or maybe they are selling their own product, apparel or something through those channels. So I can see like it on the fringes, right?
Mhm.
In different parts of the industry. It'll be interesting to see when that really starts to hit, where you buy directly through games. But
Mhm.
um, uh, for again for product designers, I want product
Mhm.
designers to hear this and think, okay, so what? Like it's a big deal. Like our brands are in all these different spaces. Like what does that mean for me, like day to day when I'm creating product? Like yes, I need to understand where my product is going to appear. But I think it's really interesting that the tools that are being used to create virtual products for like in VFX houses, or gaming studios, like where they need to
Mhm.
create realistic looking apparel using a fabric simulations and all of that and textures. Like a lot of that is now crossing over to brands, and those tools, those 3D design tools, are becoming available for brands. And you're
Mm.
seeing brands. Apple's done this a long time on the hard goods side of things, right? Where most of the product that appears on their website isn't physical product. It's a 3D
Mm.
rendering that is hyper realistic, that's someone modeled and rendered, and so there's no real need to go do a photo shoot, right? I'm sure they do in certain cases, but a lot of those product shots are just renderings, and we're
Mhm.
seeing more of that on the apparel side. And I just see those tools that were largely for game studios and for more on the traditional entertainment movie side of things is becoming available for product designers. Is that's I just see that crossover as really interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think gaming technology is like really informing or can inform like the design process. And like you said, like there's an opportunity to start playing around with those 3D designs. Um, like I think they're called skins. So like skins is like the custom in-game like outfits. So there's an opportunity for like virtual product testing, which kind of leans into like the conversation of like sustainability too. Like
Yeah.
how can we really utilize like gaming technology to improve the design, not only the design process, but the production process as
Right.
well. Like how can we really like utilize these 3D product templates or these programs to really refine the production process, right?
Right. I know a lot of, well, we try to teach this in our students, a few different 3D apparel design tools. But using programs like Clo or Browseware, I know there's plenty of others. And on the gaming side, I'm forgetting a couple of those, but like Unreal Engine, like a few of these different tools, you can make real life, realistic looking apparel. And in some cases, you can do that testing, right? You can put, using certain fabrics, the program like has that information around the stretch and the drape, and
Mm-hmm.
you can actually simulate, put your avatar in different positions and use a kind of like a heat map, and it'll show you where the fabric is stretching too much when you're in a certain
Mm-hmm.
position, right? So
Yeah.
on the sustainability side, that's really interesting, right? To be able to not have to do so many samples. We've already seen that with different brands that we've worked with, the amount of samples that we cut down by doing 3D apparel, and then using 3D renderings that are hyper realistic on the website rather than having to go and do a photo shoot and not knowing what to do with those samples afterwards is really interesting. There's a whole lot of opportunity there for our students and for the industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it like technology in general, you know, it, like I just feel like it's just so inspiring sometimes, and it really invites us to like recreate the world in a different way. And I think after like 2020, like I think we're ready to like rebuild and like restart some new things. You know what I mean? So in
Yeah.
terms of like the production process and like how we can really utilize technology to improve and refine our processes to like cut down on production and travel and like I love photo shoots, I love doing all that kind of stuff. It's really creative, it's really great, but I think we're seeing like some really cool and creative things happening in the virtual world, and gaming technology is really spearheading that.
Right, for sure. Well, I guess to kind of wind down the conversation a little bit, I'm like, you're ending us on an optimistic note, which I
Yeah.
like, especially this year and last year. But what are you looking forward to in this space? What really excites you about the opportunities that are in this space?
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I think the possibilities are kind of endless,
Yeah.
and like what really kicked off this whole, conversation was that, Gucci, North Face, and Pokemon Go collaboration. And the reason why I like that so much is because it really shines a light on the possibilities of collaboration. Like, anybody can be a collaborator in today's world. There's no, there's no boundaries anymore. And I think that that's really great. And I think that's really um, inspiring. And I also think that gaming has an opportunity to create or invite people to engage with nature in really creative ways. Like Pokemon Go, again, is rooted in not keeping you on the couch, but getting you outside.
Hmm.
And, with that, we're like able to cultivate, like another generation of like land stewards of like, like you might be on your phone getting outside, but like you're still getting outside, you're moving your legs, you're being active, and you're outside, and maybe you'll, like engage with nature in a creative way that inspires you to protect that space. Like you received the invitation to go outside from this game. And if it's a game that gets you outside, I'm cool with that. Gaming technology, like really inviting us to refine our processes of production and design and stuff like that. I welcome that, because I think we are ready for a heavy reset in all areas of, the industry and just like humans in general.
Right. Yeah,
I
totally.
don't know.
No, I feel the same way. I've been super interested in this topic. I think it's the amount of collaborations that have been popping up recently. And then when I saw that you've been talking about it, I must have missed that session a few years back, but wish I could have watched that in full. I guess we can, right? Is that available if people wanted to check that out?
The trend presentation where
Yeah.
I think it's on the Range Facebook page. I would have to go back and look though. I'm not sure if it was
If it's
available.
available, we'll link to it in the
Yeah.
description. But any parting thoughts? I know that we covered a lot of territory, and we could certainly do a part two at some point. But what are we? Did we
Yeah, I
miss
think
anything?
a part two could be cool because like we didn't even like get into like EA sportswear
Yeah,
and like designers like design, like like just so like y'all know, like athletes are like the new influencers, like athletes
yeah,
are it. But like gamers are now athletes.
right. Oh
So we
yeah,
can talk about that
yeah.
like
The new
a part of that.
categories to design for, right? Like new sports that are coming up. That could be really interesting. I mean, you have
Mhm.
people like, is it Ninja, who has, I don't remember how many
Yes.
followers that he has, right? And I think, isn't he working with Adidas? Is he an Adidas athlete?
I'm
I,
not sure if he works with Adidas, but I did see that he like played like against Drake or something in like
oh yeah,
2018, and
yeah,
it like broke the game. And
yeah.
we got to watch out for gamers. Like they are the new athletes, and we're already seeing brands design clothing and sportswear for them. So that could be its own conversation.
I think it could be for sure. Well, we'll have to schedule that. But this has been great. There's a lot to chew on here. How do people
Yeah,
stay in touch with you and keep up with all things Lisa and Range?
yeah, you can find Range at This Is Range on Instagram or thisisrange.com. You can find me at lady_max. My personal account is like very haphazard, but if you reach out to Range, you'll likely find me. So
That's great. Well, this has been awesome. Let's do another one. There's so much more to
yes,
talk about.
yeah,
Appreciate you taking the time.
yeah, thanks, Chase.